My fiancé once told me he loved me because I was confident in my own skin. That's what made this whole thing hurt the most. Not the words he said later, but the fact that for years, I genuinely believed I was safe with him. I believed I had found someone who saw me as a whole person, not a project to fix or an image to polish. I met Dennis 4 years ago at a work conference I almost didn't attend. I remember standing near the coffee station, scrolling through emails on my phone, when he made a joke about how the conference coffee tasted like regret and bad decisions. I laughed harder than I meant to, and he smiled like he was surprised he'd gotten that reaction. He was confident, loud in an easy way, the kind of person who filled space without asking permission. He was also a big guy, noticeably bigger than most people in the room, and completely unapologetic about it. I liked that about him. I liked that he didn't shrink himself. We talked for the rest of the break and ended up sitting together during the next panel. By the end of the day, he asked for my number like it was the most natural thing in the world. Dating him felt easy. He was funny, attentive, and openly affectionate. He told me often how beautiful he thought I was, how lucky he felt to be with me. At the time, I weighed around 140 pounds and wore a size 6. I exercised regularly, not because I hated my body, but because I enjoyed moving it. Dennis never made comments about my weight back then. If anything, he acted like I was out of his league and he couldn't believe I chose him. That dynamic felt flattering at first. It felt like mutual appreciation. Looking back, I realize it also set the stage for something unhealthy. Dennis put me on a pedestal early on, and I mistook that for love instead of pressure. After 2 years together, he proposed at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. He got down on one knee, cried actual tears, and told me he wanted to spend the rest of his life making me happy. People around us clapped. I said yes without hesitation. I loved him. I trusted him. I thought we were choosing each other exactly as we were. Wedding planning started almost immediately, and that's when I noticed the first cracks. Dennis had very strong opinions about everything. The venue had to be a specific place he liked. The food needed to impress his extended family. The band had to be energetic but classy. The colors were navy and gold because those were his college colors. The guest list grew to include people I barely knew. I told myself it was fine. He was excited. I didn't want to dampen that excitement. Compromise, I thought, meant letting him take the lead sometimes. Sometimes slowly became almost always. One thing he obsessed over more than anything else was the photography. Dennis spent hours comparing photographers, studying sample albums, reading reviews like he was researching a major purchase. He made spreadsheets breaking down pricing and editing styles. I actually found it endearing at first. He cared about memories. He wanted the day captured perfectly. I thought it was sweet. The night after we paid the photographer's deposit, Dennis asked me to sit down with him at the kitchen table. His tone was serious in a way that made my stomach tighten. He said he'd been thinking about the wedding photos, and how important they would be. He said we'd be looking at them for the rest of our lives. I agreed. Of course I did. I wanted that too. Then he told me I needed to lose weight, not gently. Not as a question. As a plan. He said cameras added weight and he didn't want me to look heavy in the pictures. He said 30 pounds would probably be enough. He said the wedding was 8 months away, so it was totally doable if I started right away. He even mentioned that he'd already looked into diet plans and gym memberships that might work for me. I remember staring at him, waiting for the punchline. It never came. I asked him to repeat himself because I genuinely thought I must have misunderstood. He repeated it calmly, like he was explaining a budget adjustment or a scheduling conflict. He said he just wanted me to look my best. He said brides were supposed to glow. He said he was only bringing it up because he loved me. When I asked if he planned to lose weight too, he laughed. That laugh changed everything. He said it wasn't the same. He said grooms didn't face the same expectations. He said everyone would be looking at me anyway, so it made sense for me to put in the effort. He said tuxedos were flattering on all body types. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he mentioned that his mother agreed with him. That's when I realized this wasn't a spontaneous thought. They had discussed my body together. I hadn't gained any weight. I still ran every morning. I still practiced yoga twice a week. The only thing that had changed was how Dennis saw me. Or maybe how comfortable he felt finally saying what he'd always thought. I asked him one last question. I asked if he would still want to marry me if I didn't lose the weight. He hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any insult. In that moment, I understood something I couldn't unsee. His love had conditions. And once love has conditions tied to your body, it stops being love. I took off my engagement ring and placed it on the table between us. And that's when my life changed. The ring sat between us on the kitchen table, like it didn't belong to either of us anymore. Dennis kept staring at it, then at me, like he was waiting for me to laugh and tell him this was all a dramatic misunderstanding. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. He finally asked what I thought I was doing. His voice wasn't angry yet, just confused, almost offended. I told him I was losing weight, starting immediately. He asked how much, and when I told him about 180 pounds, it took a moment for the words to land. I watched his face shift as he realized I wasn't talking about myself. The panic came fast after that. He started talking all at once, saying I was being dramatic, that I was twisting his words, that he never said I wasn't beautiful. He said this was just about photos, just about presentation, just about one day. That word just kept coming up. Just a suggestion. Just aesthetics. Just something couples compromise on. He didn't seem to understand that none of it felt small to me anymore. He had reduced me to something that needed adjustment, something that needed approval. And worse, he expected me to accept it gratefully. When I told him I needed space, he refused to leave. He reminded me his name was on the lease too. He said I was overreacting and trying to punish him. That's when I realized I wasn't going to get clarity sitting across from him. I grabbed my keys and walked out before I could talk myself into staying. Driving felt unreal, like I was watching myself from the outside. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and my thoughts kept looping back to the same moment. The hesitation when I asked if he'd still marry me. That pause told me everything I needed to know about how our future would look. I wasn't leaving over one comment. I was leaving over the realization that I would spend my marriage proving I was worthy. Felicia opened her door without asking questions. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside like she already knew. She made tea, sat next to me, and let me talk until my throat hurt. I told her everything, the photos, the weight, his mother being involved. I expected shock. What I got was anger. Real anger. On my behalf. Hearing someone else say out loud that it wasn't okay, made something inside me loosen. The next morning, my phone was full of missed calls and messages. Apologies mixed with accusations. Dennis went from, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that," to, "You're being childish," in less than 12 hours. His mother's name came up more than once. That told me this wasn't just him panicking, this was a family pattern closing ranks. Felicia didn't let me spiral. She made coffee, sat me down, and started listing practical steps on a napkin like this was a crisis she was trained for. Separate finances. Figure out the lease. Decide what I wanted, not what I could tolerate. That last part hit harder than anything else. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I'd spent so long accommodating Dennis's certainty that I forgot how to hear my own voice. I went back to the apartment while he was at work. Walking inside felt strange, like the place already belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. The ring was still on the table. I didn't pick it up. I packed what was mine: clothes, books, running shoes, photos, small things that felt like pieces of myself. Everything else suddenly looked foreign. His furniture, his decorations, his mother's influence everywhere. I realized how little space I'd actually been taking up in my own life. Dennis came back while I was loading my car. He tried to talk again. He kept saying I misunderstood him, that he was trying to help, that love meant honesty. I told him honesty without respect was just cruelty dressed up nicely. He didn't like that answer. He talked louder. I closed my trunk and drove away while he was still explaining himself. Over the next few days, things unraveled quickly. I opened my own bank account. I talked to the landlord. I canceled the wedding plans and absorbed the financial hit with a strange sense of relief. Losing money hurt, but not as much as losing myself would have. Every signature I wrote felt like reclaiming a piece of my autonomy. Dennis showed up uninvited once, angry and demanding. Felicia handled him better than I could have. When he left, kicking the doorframe on the way out, I knew I'd made the right choice. Love doesn't scare you like that. Love doesn't feel like walking on eggshells. Work became my refuge. I kept my head down, focused on deadlines, avoided questions about wedding planning. Therapy came next. The therapist didn't tell me what to do. She asked questions I hadn't asked myself, about why I let him make all the decisions, about why I felt grateful to be chosen instead of confident I deserved to choose back. That was uncomfortable, necessary. Healing isn't gentle when it's real. The more distance I got, the clearer everything became. The comments weren't new, the control wasn't sudden. It just escalated once he thought I was locked in. Engagement had made him comfortable showing me who he really was, and I was finally seeing it. By the end of the week, I wasn't heartbroken the way I expected to be. I was angry, focused, awake. I didn't miss him the way people said I would. I missed the idea of who I thought he was. The man who laughed easily. The man who cried during the proposal. That man didn't exist anymore, or maybe never did. What existed now was a woman learning how to take up space again, and that scared him more than any weight I could ever lose. Once I was out of the apartment, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. Leaving was just the beginning. The real weight came afterward, in the form of messages, opinions, and people who suddenly felt entitled to explain my own relationship to me. Dennis didn't stop reaching out. His texts came in waves. Some were apologetic, others defensive, and a few were outright angry. He kept insisting that I misunderstood him, that he phrased things poorly, that I was blowing one comment out of proportion. He framed it like a communication issue instead of what it really was, a values issue. The more he talked, the clearer it became that he genuinely didn't see anything wrong with what he'd asked. His mother got involved quickly. She didn't contact me directly at first. Instead, she worked through him. Dennis told me she was worried about us, that she thought we were making a mistake by reacting emotionally. He said she believed marriage required compromise and sacrifice. When I asked what kind of compromise involved my body but not his, he didn't have an answer. He just repeated that she was trying to help. That word again. Help. I started hearing things through mutual friends. People I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly checked in, asking vague questions about how I was doing. Some hinted that Dennis was really struggling and heartbroken. Others implied I left without warning. No one asked what he'd said to me. No one asked why I felt unsafe enough to walk away. The narrative forming around me painted Dennis as blindsided and me as dramatic. For the first time, I felt the urge to defend myself publicly, to explain, to justify, to make people understand I wasn't impulsive or cruel. But therapy had already taught me something important. You don't owe clarity to people who are comfortable misunderstanding you. I decided to stay quiet and focus on stabilizing my own life instead of managing his image. That decision was tested when his mother finally reached out. Her message was long and carefully written. She said she was disappointed in how I handled things. She said Dennis loved me and didn't deserve to be abandoned over something so small. She said women in her generation understood that marriage meant maintaining yourself and meeting expectations. She warned me that no man would be patient forever if I refused to improve myself. She ended by saying she hoped I would come to my senses. Reading it made my hands shake, not because I believed her, but because I realized how long she'd been shaping his thinking. This wasn't just Dennis's idea. It was a belief system he grew up with. One where women were evaluated and men were excused. I didn't respond. I blocked her number instead. That's when Dennis escalated. He showed up at Felicia's apartment unannounced one evening, demanding to talk. He said I was being influenced by my friends. He said they were poisoning me against him. Felicia didn't let him in. When he refused to leave, she threatened to call the police. The look on his face when he realized he couldn't control the situation anymore stayed with me. It wasn't heartbreak. It was entitlement. The next day, I met with the landlord. The lease situation was messy but manageable. I learned what I needed to do to remove myself legally. Having something concrete to focus on helped. Practical steps grounded me when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Every form I filled out felt like reclaiming a little more control. Around that time, something unexpected happened. A friend from Dennis's circle reached out privately. She said she didn't know the details, but something about his version of events felt off. She asked me what really happened. I debated whether to answer. Then I told her the truth. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just facts. He asked me to lose weight so he could be proud of his bride. He laughed when I asked if he'd do the same. His mother agreed with him. She went quiet for a long time before responding. Then, she apologized. That moment mattered more than I expected. Not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me I wasn't imagining things. Reasonable people could hear what happened and recognize it as wrong. More confirmations followed. Small ones. Subtle ones. Comments from friends who admitted Dennis sometimes made uncomfortable jokes about appearance. A coworker who said he talked about women's bodies more than she realized at the time. Each piece added clarity. This wasn't an isolated comment. It was a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. Dennis kept trying to negotiate the breakup like it was a contract. He suggested couples counseling. He promised to be more careful with his words. He said he never meant to make me feel small. But every apology came with a condition. I forgive, we move on, and he doesn't have to fully confront what he did. I realized something important then. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing access to me. Therapy helped me untangle that. My therapist asked what I imagined my future would look like if I stayed. I pictured myself constantly adjusting, watching what I ate, wondering how things would photograph, second-guessing my worth every time he hesitated. That image was exhausting. Leaving felt terrifying, but staying felt like disappearing. By the end of the month, my life looked very different. I lived out of suitcases. I had my own bank account. The wedding was officially canceled. People stopped asking questions once they realized I wouldn't perform sadness for them. Some drifted away. Others stepped closer. That sorting was painful but necessary. Dennis sent one final message asking if I was really willing to throw away 4 years over one comment. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I told him it wasn't one comment. It was the moment I realized I would never be enough for him unless I kept changing. I told him I deserved a partner who was proud of me without conditions. He never replied. And for the first time since all of this began, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. I thought once I blocked Dennis and his mother, the noise would die down. Instead, it changed shape. It became quieter, more indirect, but no less heavy. The messages stopped, but the consequences of being with him for 4 years were still unfolding around me. I was learning that leaving a relationship doesn't mean you immediately leave its gravity. The first real shift came when someone from Dennis's past reached out. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't confrontational. It was cautious. She messaged me late one night and said she hoped it wasn't strange to contact me, but she had heard about the breakup and wanted to check on me. Her name was Rachel. I recognized it immediately. Dennis had mentioned her once or twice early in our relationship, always vaguely, always dismissively. We just grew apart, he'd said. At the time, I believed him. We agreed to meet for lunch a few days later. I almost canceled twice. Part of me didn't want confirmation of what I was already suspecting. The restaurant was quiet, neutral, halfway between our neighborhoods. Rachel arrived a few minutes late and apologized more than necessary. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if she was crossing a line. She didn't waste time once we sat down. She asked me what happened between Dennis and me. I told her the truth, plainly. The weight demand. The photos. The laugh. His mother's involvement. I watched her face change as I spoke. Not shock. Recognition. That was the moment my stomach dropped. She told me Dennis was the same with her. Not at first. At first he was charming and attentive and generous with compliments. Then slowly, the comments started. Suggestions disguised as concern. He asked why she didn't dress up more. He said she should aim higher in her career. He told her some of her friends were holding her back. Eventually he commented on her body. Nothing overt at first. Just questions. Have you thought about toning up? Wouldn't you feel better if you lost a little weight? Always framed as care. Always positioned as wanting the best for her. Rachel said she spent months trying to become the version of herself he approved of. She changed her hair. Her clothes. Her routine. She joined a gym she hated. And every time she adjusted, the standard moved. There was always something else that needed fixing. She finally left when she realized it would never end, because it wasn't about improvement, it was about control. Hearing her say that felt like someone turning on a light in a dark room. Everything I'd been replaying suddenly made sense. Dennis didn't suddenly become this person when we got engaged. He always was. He just waited until he thought I was committed enough not to leave. I went home after that lunch and cried. Not because I missed him, but because I felt foolish. I replayed moments I'd brushed off as nothing. Comments I'd laughed at to avoid discomfort. Decisions I let him make because it seemed easier than pushing back. I wasn't angry at myself, but I was grieving the version of me that thought love meant flexibility instead of equality. That grief didn't last long. It turned into something firmer. I started noticing how many people had seen things I hadn't. Friends admitted Dennis talked over me often. Others said he made jokes about women's appearances when I wasn't around. One coworker told me she always felt tense when he was at events, like she was waiting for him to say something inappropriate. No one had spoken up before because they assumed I was okay with it. I wasn't. therapy sessions shifted after that. Instead of asking why I stayed, we talked about why I didn't leave sooner. The answer wasn't weakness. It was conditioning. I had learned to be agreeable, to avoid being difficult, to interpret discomfort as something to push through instead of something to listen to. Dennis didn't create that habit, but he benefited from it. Around the same time, Dennis tried to re-enter my life one last time. He emailed me a long message listing everything he'd done right in our relationship. The trips he planned, the support he gave, the way he showed up when things were hard. He framed the wait comment as a single mistake and accused me of throwing everything away because I couldn't forgive. I almost replied. I wrote 3 different responses and deleted all of them. My therapist asked me a simple question when I read her the email. She asked, "Is this about understanding, or is this about control?" That question changed everything. Dennis wasn't trying to understand why he hurt me. He was trying to negotiate his way back into access. I didn't respond. That silence felt powerful in a way I hadn't experienced before. I didn't owe him closure. I didn't owe him reassurance. I owed myself peace. Life started filling the space he left behind. I ran longer distances. I signed up for harder yoga classes. Not to change my body for anyone else, but because movement reminded me I was strong, capable, in control. I felt my confidence returning in places I didn't expect. At work, in conversations, in decisions I made without second-guessing myself. The story about why Dennis and I broke up spread slowly. I didn't correct it. I didn't amplify it. People made their own conclusions. Some drifted away. Others reached out with quiet support. I learned who believed women when they spoke and who didn't. That knowledge hurt, but it was clarifying. One night, I looked at myself in the mirror after a long run. Sweat-soaked hair, red face, strong legs, the same body Dennis said needed fixing. And for the first time I saw it clearly. My body had carried me through heartbreak, upheaval, and rebuilding. It didn't need his approval. It never did. Rachel texted me a week later to say she was proud of me for leaving. She said it took her years to understand what Dennis was doing. I told her she helped me more than she realized. We both deserved better. And we both knew it now. That chapter of my life was closing. Not with a dramatic confrontation, but with clarity. Dennis wasn't a villain in a movie. He was something more ordinary and more dangerous. A man who believed love meant improvement and improvement meant control. And I was done being improved. The strange thing about healing is that it doesn't announce itself. One day you're surviving, counting hours, replaying conversations in your head. And then one ordinary morning, you realize the weight on your chest is lighter. Not gone. Just lighter. Enough that you can breathe without forcing it. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after Dennis disappeared from it. It became quieter. And in that quiet, I started hearing myself again. I moved into a small place of my own. It wasn't fancy. The kitchen was tiny, and the walls were plain, but every decision inside it was mine. I chose the curtains without asking anyone if they were too much. I arranged the furniture based on comfort, not appearance. For the first time in years, my home reflected me instead of a compromise. Work became a refuge. Without realizing it, I started taking up more space there too. I spoke in meetings instead of waiting to be invited. I stopped softening my opinions to make them easier to accept. A few weeks later, my manager told me they noticed. A few months later, that notice turned into a promotion. I sat in my car afterward and cried. Not because of the title or the raise, but because I finally felt seen for who I was, not how agreeable I could be. Therapy shifted again. We stopped talking so much about Dennis and started talking about patterns. Why I ignored red flags. Why I confused consistency with safety. Why I believed love required me to adjust while the other person stayed the same. None of those realizations were easy, but they were freeing. The biggest change showed up in my body, not in how it looked, but in how I treated it. I ran because it made me feel strong, not smaller. I ate without guilt. I rested without apologizing. My body stopped being something to manage, and became something to live in again. People asked if I hated Dennis now. I didn't. Hate would have meant he still mattered that much. What I felt was distance. The kind that comes when you understand something clearly and no longer need to argue with it. Months later, he tried one last time. He showed up unannounced, thinner, quieter, full of rehearsed remorse. He said therapy helped him see what he did wrong. He said he'd changed. He asked for another chance. I listened calmly. And then I said no, not angrily, not emotionally, just honestly. Some things don't break loudly. They break trust. And once that's gone, rebuilding it isn't a favor you owe someone, it's a choice. And I wasn't choosing him again. When he left, my hands shook. Not from fear, but from certainty. That kind of certainty feels dangerous when you're not used to trusting yourself. I started dating again slowly. Coffee dates, walks, conversations. The difference was immediate. I noticed when something felt off and didn't explain it away. I said no without justification. I left early when I wanted to. I stayed when it felt right. And for the first time, love didn't feel like pressure. It felt like curiosity. One night, after a long run, I caught my reflection in a store window. Tired, sweaty, smiling without realizing it. The same woman Dennis thought needed fixing. The same body. The same face. The difference was inside. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I thought back to the night I placed the ring on the table. The confusion in his eyes. The moment he realized control didn't work on someone who chose themselves. That moment didn't just end a relationship. It rewired something in me. I learned that love without respect is just possession. That concern can be a mask for entitlement. That pride in a partner doesn't come from how they look, but from how they live. A year later, I ran my first half marathon. Crossing that finish line felt symbolic in a way I couldn't explain to anyone else. My body carried me there, the same body someone once told me wasn't enough. It always was. Sometimes I still think about how close I came to marrying someone who needed me smaller to feel bigger. And instead of fear, I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the moment clarity broke through politeness. For the courage to walk away before I disappeared. I didn't lose weight that day. I lost a future where I would have spent my life proving I deserved to be loved. And that was the best decision I ever made.